Hi, and welcome to the Good Health Podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Good, a registered nutritional therapy practitioner and functional medicine practitioner. Join me as we explore thyroid, brain, and fatigue conditions with positivity. From Hashimoto's to multiple sclerosis, chronic fatigue to adrenal dysfunction, I've got you covered. With expert advice and tips to help you take action now and inspiring real patient stories from successful individuals who refuse to let their health hold them back. Start your journey to good health today. And don't forget to come and join the conversation on Instagram at good_health. That's GOODE. Or visit my website at nicolegoodhealth.com to find out more. Welcome to today's episode of the Good Health Podcast. In this episode, we're going to be jumping into a very specialized area of an integrative approach to cancer. My guest today is Gillian Bertram. She's a registered nutritional therapist, a functional medicine practitioner, and an integrative health coach. She's also a survivor of grade 3 brain cancer. Thanks to her own personal experience with cancer, Gillian is passionate about supporting people who wish to integrate complementary therapies alongside standard cancer care. After studying for 4 years at the Institute for Optimum Nutrition in London and having apprenticeships with integrative medical doctors, Gillian founded the Bertram Clinic Nutrition and Lifestyle Medicine. Her mission is to help people to integrate their medical care with nutrition and lifestyle choices. Gillian's integrative approach to health really pulls together therapeutic nutrition, lifestyle, and mindset medicine, as well as mitochondrial optimization to help restore the body's ability to heal. As you'll see as we move through the episode, a lot of the things we talk about are things that we work on with people with autoimmunity, things that I'm doing in clinic all the time. A lot of those things that from underlying chronic illness really come through the whole episode. So without further delay, let's jump into the conversation with Gilly and let's find out more about integrative approach to cancer. Gillian, welcome to the Good Health Podcast. It's great to have you here today.
Hey, Nicole. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so today we're jumping in. It's a little bit of a different topic for us today. So I don't work with people with cancer. And obviously this is your big focal point and you are amazing at it. And I just really wanted to get you on today to have a chat through with you, the other options that are available to people if they want to take a slightly different approach. They want to look at what else they can do to support themselves when they're on that journey. You know, I know we've both got sort of personal stories with cancer, and I would love to start there. So why don't you tell us how you got into this work?
Okay. Well, thanks for having me. That's a lovely intro. I got into this weirdly even before I got my own diagnosis of brain cancer back in 2015. It was actually back in 2011 that a good friend of mine who actually had a autoimmune condition called ankylosing spondylitis that I was really good friends with back when I was living in Paris at the time. And I was actually trying to help him overcome and find the root cause of his AS, totally unknowing what was in store for me 4 years later. But anyway, we spent a lot of time I'm doing a lot of emotional work around the root cause of these conditions because I'd been coming across, big ties between trauma in a person's early life and that later on in life manifesting in a chronic illness or cancer. Anyway, through a lot of our kind of soul searching and trying to help each other, he gifted me a book in 2011 called Anti-Cancer, A New Way of Life. And that book was actually written by a French psychiatrist who was working over in the US. And he was diagnosed at the exact age that I was when he was diagnosed with his brain tumor. But he was working over there. And actually, he was running an experiment in the hospital that he was working at in Philadelphia, and he needed volunteers to go into the MRI machine because they were doing a brain scan experiment for his research. And there was a day where they were missing someone, they were lacking a volunteer to come be one of the patients. And so he got into the MRI scanner machine, and that's how they found his tumor. So it was very, accidental, but luckily for him, because it meant that they found it in time and he could have the standard of care, which was surgery, radiotherapy and chemotherapy. And so as he was a medic himself and surrounded by, worked in a hospital environment, so he had all the colleagues ready there to help him and instruct him, well, what should I do? At the time, he was a smoker. He didn't look after his diet or health really. And he said, anything I need to be thinking about, as well as the treatment. And they all said, no, don't worry about it. Just do the treatment. You'll be fine. And so he did what they said. And a year later, a recurrence brain tumor is back. And so then he had to have the standard of care after that point is more chemotherapy. So he did another 6 months or a year of chemotherapy. And he asked them again, this time around, is there anything else I can do to improve my chances? And the same answer came back, just do the treatment. That's all you need to do. That's all the available evidence that there is for this condition and this type of brain cancer. But that wasn't enough for him this time. I think when you get a recurrence, it's, there's a message trying to speak to you. And so he dove into the research on his own and pulled up hundreds of studies on different foods and herbs and spices that carry these anti-cancer properties. And he collated it all into this book, Anti-Cancer: A New Way of Life. So by the time I came across this book and I was reading it, I remember the moment I finished it to this day, and I finished it and I was like, oh my God, I don't need to be scared if I get cancer one day. I know what to do. It was all in that book. And from that moment, so 4 years before my diagnosis, that book completely filled me with excitement about something that I'd never really had a firm passion about anything in my life up until that point. And this just gave me everything I needed. And I just couldn't believe that no one was talking about any of this, like things that you can buy in your supermarket that you can eat on a daily basis or put in a juice or bring into your life on a daily basis that can actively counteract and inhibit cancer cell growth. And he'd put all the studies in this book, all the references. So none of it was just airy-fairy like woo-woo stuff. It was literally legit research that anyone can still look for that research today. And that completely inspired me to go from working in a very shallow and unfulfilling career in the modeling industry in Paris. I was a model agent. So I basically worked for a scouting agency. So we looked for young models who had no idea they could be fashion models. And we would train them and, book them in places like Japan and Asia where they could learn English well enough, because they were all from Eastern Europe, most of them, so that they could then travel to New York and London and Tokyo and Paris to do the big fashion shows and work for big magazines and kind of stuff like that, which was, when I was in my early 20s, the best job ever.
You're
And I was
really
living in Paris, working in fashion, like living the dream. But that came with it a lot of exhaustion. It was a 24/7 round-the-clock job. You're at the beck and call of these models, beck and call of these model agencies where you place these models to do their work. These models, young girls, were like flying across the world, visas, having to, help them if things went wrong at immigration. Very stressful. You just had to be there no matter what. At the same time, you had to basically be sister, counselor, nutritionist, best friend to these girls, to carry them through this really important stage of their lives, really. And then just to be forgotten about the next day once they find a boyfriend or something better comes up and they don't want to do the job anymore. So really draining work that, I gave everything for, until I, with all the bad habits that I had in my 20s as well. I was actually a chain smoker, binge drinker, again, having the time of my life during my 20s, but completely unaware that I was actually doing awful damage internally to my cells. And all of that I would only find out after I was actually diagnosed. So all that to say, that book completely changed my life. And it also meant that 4 years later, when I got my diagnosis, I didn't have the fear associated with a cancer diagnosis that most people do. And so looking back, I can see that really helped, I think, how I am so well up until this day. This end of this year will be 9 years from my diagnosis, which for a grade 3 brain tumor, the scientific name was anaplastic astrocytoma, high risk of recurrence. I did do standard of care. Well, I'll come back to this, but I do think not having that fear back in 2015, because I read that book prior to that and all the research I had done along the way, meant that, I didn't have that fear. And now that I'm working with a lot of patients, a lot of my job, I feel, is helping people to not freak out, because cancer is a slow growing process. The oncologists like to scare people into thinking that it's fast growing and you've got to act immediately. But actually, it is a very slow growing process, and you do have time to sit back and make decisions which aren't based on fear. And I think that's one of the biggest important things. Obviously, there's a caveat. If someone's got a blockage and the tumor is causing, a blockage somewhere, then obviously things are quite an emergency. But in most cases, that's not the case. And most people come to me following a diagnosis very healthy and well. They never even dreamed they would have a cancer diagnosis. And so, yeah, a big part of my job now is just to let people understand that it is okay to take a moment, get second opinions, really shop around to find your health team, basically.
I can relate to that because we've had, I know you know this already, and probably some of the listeners may know this already, but we've recently had a cancer diagnosis in the family. And it is that sort of that shock and fear of just not being completely well. And then all of a sudden there is this big, and there is a lot of that fear as soon as you hit, as soon as that, the big C word comes out, there is that fear automatically around it, isn't there?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the number one most feared disease to get, I think. And that's why I was so passionate. I was like, I can't believe no one is talking about this. It's the most feared disease that no one ever wants to get. No one's talking about all these things that you can actually do to help yourself if you end up with a cancer diagnosis. So I knew, okay, well, from all my research and reading, so in this book, he talks about all the foods. So, important to find a nutritionist. Well, and the book and all that research led me to functional medicine in the end, which in the end led me to know that I couldn't, if I was going to change my career, because this is what I wanted to do, I had to move back from France to the UK because functional medicine just doesn't exist in France.
Yeah.
They're very old school. There was a lot of naturopathy, iridology, that kind of thing. But I knew from all my research leading up to that point that I wanted to get to the root cause of why people got cancer and help people and figure out how they got to that place. And then once you know how you got to that place, it's very easy to kind of work backwards and close those doors to things that might have led to, as much as you can.
Yeah. And there's a crossover there with what I do with the autoimmunity work, because that again heavily is in the root causes. And I'm sure a lot of the root causes as we carry on chatting are going to come up. A lot of them are going to come up the same, things like stress, all of these things that, stress, lifestyle, diet, toxins. There's lots of things that I'm sure are going to cross over. And you are right, because we do seem to talk more about, even if we take something as sort of more simple, like that sort of diabetes or something like that, there's more talk now around, root causes like, diet, lifestyle, all of these sorts of things for reversing diabetes, which is a chronic illness. Like, it's one of these sort of chronic things that we get. Autoimmunity, again, chronic illness. It's one of those things that can come from this, I talk a lot about this chain of, stress, diet, lifestyle, moving to that sort of burnout, because we all push through, because we tend to keep going,
because you never think anything's on the other side of it.
Exactly. leading to that sort of autoimmune disease. It's very much the same, I guess, from what you're saying, very much that same pattern with cancer diagnoses, that that root cause pathway is still there, but we don't really, we hear a lot about it with diabetes now. That's become a lot more commonplace to talk about it. It's becoming more commonplace that we talk about it with autoimmunity. It's kind of coming through a bit more, hopefully, now. But we still don't really hear it talked about with cancer at all.
No, and even the opposite. And actually, if you go to a cancer hospital, they're telling people the complete opposite, that don't do anything. Until to this day, I mean, Servan Schreiber, who wrote the anti-cancer book, this was, he wrote that back in, I would say early 2000s, I think. I only read it in 2011. So back then, maybe understandable, it hadn't caught on yet. But in today's world, as you say, like diabetes, chronic heart disease, all of those, if you have those kind of conditions and you go to a doctor, they're talking about diet and lifestyle and, improving that side of things. But if you've got cancer, oh no, don't change anything. It won't make a difference. It's like, how come with diabetes and chronic heart disease, that makes a difference and it's welcome? I don't know. It's still...
It doesn't make sense. So when you think logically, it doesn't make sense, does it? Yeah.
Wow.
So what are the key the key principles behind functional medicine for cancer? How can it, because we're not saying that people don't need treatment. We're talking about what else can we do? Thinking outside the box, what else can people do to support their health at prevent cancer, or if you've got diagnoses to help you through treatment with side effects of treatment, all of these different sort of things. So
yeah,
What are those key principles that allow it to kind of tie in and complement conventional medicine?
Well, I think very similar with what you do with your clients, taking the full patient's history and like going back to literally in the womb where their mother's stressed out. How was the pregnancy of the mom whilst they were in utero? Looking even past that into grandparents and great-grandparents. Did they go through very hard times during the Great Depression or the World Wars? We're seeing, epigenetics plays a massive part in what I'm seeing as well, things trickling down from generations and impacting how people handle their stress these days. And so in that patient questionnaire and intake form, really digging deep, were they a cesarean child? I mean, I'm sure you asked all the same questions as well.
Yeah.
And then overall looking at, gut microbiome, how have they been on tons of antibiotics? Do we need to, which part of them as a person, which area do we need to be focusing on, maybe them more than others? Is it their microbiome health? Is it more their immune system that might have been compromised from an early age? Sometimes it's things that we wouldn't even think about. So, just having, if as a kid, eczema, parents thinking, oh, going to the GP and they'll be given like hydrocortisone cream, topical steroids. Each time someone's given steroids, it is harming their immune system. And so if that's a repeated thing during their upbringing as a child, over the course of their life, they are gradually eating away at a healthy immune system and the ability for their cells to really be able to defend themselves against cancer when it starts getting a bit out of control. So we're looking at that element a lot. And actually, one of the first kind of screening tests I'll encourage people to get is a full nutrigenomic screen so that I can know, well, from mum and dad, what did you get? What were you given? And what out of those things, those variations that make you the individual that you are, what makes you different? And are there any potential weaknesses there that we could support so that they don't manifest and turn on not so great genes that are helping the cancer process? The great thing about it, these are all modifiable factors. And, just having that knowledge. So for me, for example, looking back when I was diagnosed, so I ran some epigenetic testing, and I found out that actually for me, my liver does not detoxify alcohol at all well. It does not I can't break down cigarette smoke like someone else might as well. So those two things for me as an individual are 100 times more toxic than they are to someone else. And so that really helps with my motivation when I gave up alcohol, after my diagnosis, still to this day, doesn't bother me if I have to watch everyone else at a party get completely wasted. I found other things that, I don't need that anymore. I can fulfill myself in other ways. So, but it helps to have that information to make that decision. Same with quitting smoking. Obviously, that's a no-brainer. Obviously, that's not going to be helping me. But to know that why me and not all my other friends who are also smoking around the clock with me and drinking and partying around the clock, why did this happen to me and not someone else? That was always a question I was trying to get to the bottom of. And through functional testing, that really helped clarify that for me. And so it made all of those lifestyle changes so much easier to follow. And that's what I try and help my patients with now, which I'm sure is exactly what you do with yours.
Yeah, I haven't done the testing for alcohol for me, but I'm pretty sure it would come back because I just don't tolerate it well. I just don't. I literally, I can have I don't really drink, but I'll have a glass if it's a birthday or, something like that. And I can't drink more than that anyway, because I'll have a glass for a birthday and that's it. I'm drunk after one anyway. I just go straight to my head.
We're very cheap dates, so it's kind of good in a way.
I always say that, really cheap date. One drink and that's it, I'm done.
But that was really helpful for me. And actually throughout all those tests that I run with all my clients, mine is the only one that I've ever seen to come back with zero tolerance for alcohol.
Really?
So it's really interesting. And actually, even recently when I've been looking back at my test results, because I'm always looking at other people's, but really looking at mine again, it's like, okay, really just need to not care about this alcohol thing anymore. Just like, it's just not part of my life anymore. And that's really easy because I'm ingraining this knowledge that I now have that concrete, like I do not do alcohol well. So
I think seeing things on paper, I find with a lot of my clients as well, that actually just seeing something on paper written down, rather than somebody, like us telling you, don't drink so much, don't do this, I think a lot of the time they kind of think, oh yeah, but you just like live this like really healthy life and blah, blah, blah. And it's, none of us are perfect, but there's a way they can almost kind of justify it. Whereas if you actually show them a piece of paper and say, this is you, this is your genes, this is it here in black and white, what do you now want to do about it? I think it just makes it a lot easier for people to say,
oh, totally,
I need to do this. Like this is now, it becomes a no-brainer. Now I have to do it. It's there in front of me. And I think it really does help in that sense, doesn't it?
Yeah. Also, I think when it comes to a cancer diagnosis, and I don't know if this is true for autoimmune, but when you get a diagnosis and you start telling people, everyone seems to think that they can tell you what you should be doing.
Yeah.
And with cancer, there's so many different things that someone can do, like literally hundreds of different supplements that someone could take that all carry anti-cancer potential and properties. And all these people mean completely well, like they're all just desperately trying to help you, but it's so overwhelming for the person that's having to like be bombarded with all of that. And so then that's where the testing can really personalize it and say, okay, well, for me, what is the most important thing? Because me, biochemically and individually, this is what sets me apart from someone else. And so the big one for cancer really is green tea. So lots of people heard green tea is excellent, for anti-cancer benefits. And so, you might find every woman with breast cancer starts drinking, buckets of matcha green tea. Everyone's going out for a matcha latte. But actually, if you run your epigenetics, if you carry a certain SNP, so a variation in a certain gene, and you have a slower metabolism and breakdown of our stress hormones and our estrogens, having green tea will actually further slow down that breakdown. And so if you're someone who's already someone who holds on to stress because you've got that variation in your genes, and then you're having buckets of green tea, which even though it's got the Zen component to it, it's still got caffeine in it. It's still going to stress your adrenals and pump out stress hormones. And then if you don't then break down those stress hormones, the higher risk of them recirculating in your system, and then you're hanging on to the stress. And cancer loves those stress hormones. And so we're trying to do really everything to reduce stress, with everything that we do in life, and really getting the person to start their day in a relaxed parasympathetic nervous system state, because really that is the only state you can heal in. As soon as we're multitasking, we get up in the morning, and of course when you're a busy mom and you've got your kids running around, like you're immediately into that stress state, you're immediately looking after someone else, and it's really hard sometimes to pull someone back into, okay, but what about me? I am the priority. I need to think about what is important for me, start my day with some meditation or some breath work or anything that really helps shift that person into that parasympathetic state. And I think the testing really helps to understand, okay, well, green tea isn't for me, even though there's no one size fits all for cancer or for any of this functional medicine stuff, really. So it's all about how do we personalize this down to the person. And that's just one thing, but also everyone going vegan when they get a cancer diagnosis. The amount of people I've had to inform and educate, but sometimes it just comes down to the test. And it's like, look, I haven't seen one of these DNA tests that comes back showing me that anyone would be a good candidate to be a vegan. Not one person yet. Like either we can't get our omega-3s from plant foods as efficiently because there's a slower conversion rate to the active forms, or it's your vitamin A's and you can't convert the plant-based forms from beta-carotene to the retinol. And so you're gradually getting deficient in these really crucial nutrients that we need for optimal, immune health and just to function at our best, right? So testing is really crucial. And then you're lining up what your genetic tendencies are with actually functional tests so we can see what's actually going on in your body right now. So you might have a genetic tendency to have a higher requirement for a certain nutrient, but then we can test, well, how do you have a deficiency in that right now? And then that's how we can pull everything together. And then from the genetics, we can see if there's a higher risk of sensitivity to things like mycotoxins or occupational toxins or pesticides and things like that. Again, giving further motivation, like this is why it's important to eat organic and pay all that money to pay for organic. And spend the time hunting down the organic, like it's a lot of cancer is a full-time job, and people need to feel like it's okay that if it's taking up their whole day, like making the food, organizing their supplements, doing therapies like the detox therapies to help their system cope either with the treatments or just generally help them detoxify, because we get cancer because at some point we become too toxic for our body to handle and we can't cope anymore. And that's when the scales tip. And sometimes that toxins can be stress, maybe it's psycho-emotional. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's environmental, but I would say a lot of the time there's always an environmental source there, and it's just about trying to dig through either the patient history with some crucial testing to really figure out, well, what in this person's case, what was the cause of their bucket to overflow, and that their body couldn't cope anymore, and that's when cancer kind of gets the upper hand.
What are the most common toxins that you see sort of coming back linked to? Are there specific ones linked to cancer, or can it be really sort of any of them?
Can be any of them, but we see a lot with heavy metals, really, pesticides causing lots of problems, different cancers, particularly cancers of kind of the urinary tract and the bladder, the organs that filter out toxins.
Yeah.
That's where we really want to see, we're digging deep and see, okay, what is going on in someone's life? And there's always usually something there. I remember sitting with a patient and I just couldn't figure her out. I was like, you seem really healthy. Like, I don't know how you landed with this. And I think it was in the last 15 minutes of the call. And she was like, oh yeah, did I tell you I used to work in a lab and I used to handle like formaldehyde quite a lot. And I was like, boom, okay. Like,
so you love it in the case when you're working on something like that and you just can't be together, and then this little nugget comes out and you're right at
there
it is.
It was like, yeah. So it was like, okay, we have something to work with now, on top of everything else. But, when you can semi-pinpoint it, and it might be a multitude of things in different people, like it all really depends. It's such an individual thing. And usually it's perfect storm. Maybe it's the same with autoimmune. It's a perfect storm of things.
Yeah, I always say that to my patients as well. Exactly the same. It's I've had it where they've said to me, so what was the root cause? What was that? What was the one thing? And the number of times I've had the conversation is, there's not one thing. There's no, we will find one thing, but then we'll find thing number 2 and 3 and 4, and it's building that picture, isn't it? Of, particularly with autoimmunity, it's that, and it's sounding like it's the same with the sort of cancer patients. There's lots of similarities of finding one of these root causes, working on that, finding the next one, working on that, and slowly we build that resilience. I always talk about it as, immune resilience. We're building that immune resilience back up. And we've got to find all these little things that have knocked that down. What can we do to build that back up? And it's very rare that I find, with my patients, I find very rare that there is one particular thing that comes up. There may have, it's occasionally we can pinpoint, actually, like in myself, for example, I know I can pinpoint Epstein-Barr virus back as a trigger for mine.
Sure.
But there were other root causes going on as well at the same time. It doesn't mean that that's the one thing. There's still that perfect storm. There's still other things going on. And yeah, it's building on all those things, isn't it? And that's different for everybody.
Yeah. And so that's interesting. So just to see that timeline, it can go back to, decades really. And, I'm always trying to say, this isn't a recent diagnosis. This has been happening for, could be 10 to 15 years, at least 5. And some of the oncologists are now saying, this tumor will have been growing for at least 5 years. So I think that's now being more understood, and they're letting the patients understand that as well. Sometimes the oncologists know stuff, but they don't tell the patients. That's where it's really frustrating. But anyway, just cycling back to prior to my diagnosis, just so that listeners have a bit more understanding of that. So I'd read that book, and 4 years later, I actually suddenly lost my dad overnight to a heart attack the year that 3 months before my diagnosis, and 6 weeks after his death. That's when I had my first seizure. So that's a common first symptom of a brain tumor, to have a seizure, perfectly functioning adult. I had 0 other symptoms. So normally with brain tumors, you hear about headaches and blurred vision or balance issues, depending on the area of the brain where the tumor is. For me, I had none of that apart from this, single seizure. And I was in London at the time, and the paramedics came because I was just in a coffee shop in the morning, and my brother had just arrived from Hong Kong because we were dealing with my dad's ashes. And so it was completely out of the blue. I literally thought, oh, I must be so out of it. I hadn't had caffeine for ages. And I suddenly had a coffee at like 5 a.m. So I was like, oh, maybe, I just felt really jittery. And my whole symptom, my seizure was my eyes just started jerking to the left. And then I kept bringing them back to center, and then they kept moving to the left. I was like, that's weird. I'm like not even looking left, but they're just going there. And then suddenly this tug of war with my own eyes started happening. And then it became so much stronger that then my head just started going to the left, and I couldn't control it, but I was completely awake. So I was kind of like, oh my God, like what is happening? And then my boyfriend at the time just, held me and calmed me down because I was almost like hyperventilating. And then the paramedics came. But by the time they came, because a seizure only lasts like 30 seconds, so it's really intense, but really short. And then you're kind of back to normal again. So by the time they arrived, all they did was like shine a torch behind my eyes, tested my reflexes, and they were like, well, you're fine. And I was like, what the hell just happened? I want to go to the A&E, please, and like get checked out.
That's not normal.
That is not normal, and nothing I've ever experienced. So I went to A&E, and they're like, oh, just go if you want to. You don't have to because you're fine. I was like, that's crazy. So anyway, I went to Chelsea and Westminster, and I knew only after the fact, but what I know now is if a adult who's never had any history of seizures or epilepsy manifests with a seizure, a brain scan should be the first port of call. And that wasn't done. So the doctor that I saw on duty, I think she wasn't quite with it at the time. She was moving to Australia, and that's what she spent most of the time talking to me about. I was like, okay, don't really care. But anyway, her head definitely wasn't with it. So she didn't order the brain scan, and the conclusion was, Dad died 6 weeks ago. Probably this was just stress related, like a panic attack. Anyway, so I flew home, had the memorial for my dad in Hong Kong. And about 2 weeks later, I had a second seizure. And it was only because I'd had my first that you have to then be ruled out for epilepsy if you have a second seizure. And so that's when they did the CT scan in the hospital. And that's when they found the tumor. So it was in the right frontal lobe of my brain. But because it was so big, it was about the size of a grapefruit. And because I didn't have any other symptoms, they thought it was benign because otherwise I'd be having more serious symptoms. So they said, go back to Paris, go back to work, come back at Christmas, because I would be back at Christmas anyway. They said at Christmas, if everything's fine, then we can biopsy it at Christmas, which would mean sticking a massive needle into my tumor and trying to figure out what it was. And from all the reading and research I'd done, I knew that biopsy came with, its own kind of risks, because obviously if a tumor is encapsulated, there are theories that the body tries to, encapsulate it to keep it, to preserve the body, actually. Our bodies, I truly believe our bodies are always trying to heal. So there are books written about, cancer is a survival mechanism of our body, just trying to keep us alive, really. And so piercing a needle through an encapsulated tumor may cause risk of it spreading. And I'd read enough that I was like, no thanks. So we actually sought a second opinion after they found the benign tumor. And so we found a neurosurgeon who was really highly rated in Hong Kong. And he, again, in hindsight, I look back and I was like, wow, I was so lucky. He was actually traveling for a month, lecturing in the US. And so he wasn't going to be available for 4 weeks for the surgery. So I was like, well, why don't we schedule it for 6 weeks so that you can recover from your jet lag from the US? Because I don't want you going into my brain like feeling a bit tired. So we did it in 6 weeks. And because I'd done all my reading, I knew I had to find a nutritionist, a functional medicine nutritionist, and I knew I had to radically change my diet. I knew I had to radically transform my life. So I was mentally prepared, like, let's do this, because I was so lucky that I'd had that kind of 4 years, prep. And I knew exactly what was going to happen. I knew if they found out it was cancerous, I'd be put on that conveyor belt. It would be chemo, radio, no questions asked, like on that conveyor belt. And it's the same thing that happens today. Patients are given no time between diagnosis and being made to make decisions on treatment, very quickly. And sometimes they're in surgery like the end of the week, and or they're being stabbed with a biopsy needle the minute that they're told. I've got clients that are still traumatized from that first day they were told they've got cancer, and the same, an hour later, a biopsy needle for a core biopsy in a woman's breast, really painful with anesthetic. That traumatizes people. And it's really shocking that that's still going on today. So I had this grace period, to see my nutritionist. So I found really quickly, and he was amazing, and he was very cancer focused because of he had a mom that, had cancer. So I was really fortunate. And we did all the functional testing, saw why I could figure out why I got this and maybe not someone else, and corrected all my nutrient deficiencies, started taking tons of supplements, a very low carb, nutrient dense diet. He wanted me to eat raw liver every single day. So that was a challenge, but it was kind of that thing where I was so passionate and focused about wanting to do this that I really just took everything in my stride and I just did it. And then when I had the surgery, that's when they found out it was a grade 3 brain tumor. And so standard of care is 6 weeks of radiation and chemotherapy at the same time, and then followed by higher dose chemotherapy for either 6 months, a year, or indefinitely, depending on which oncologist you see, which just showed me like, wow, okay, well, what is the research showing that showed that, 6 months, doing more than 6 months didn't really make a difference according to the research. So, and from all my reading, I just knew that I wanted the minimum amount of toxicity to my body. Because again, in my opinion, I was well, pretty much, bar those 2 seizures. I had nothing else wrong with me. The last thing I wanted to do was suddenly put myself through some awful treatment. But, coming back to the stress side of things, the stress that induced, because obviously my poor family, my mum and my brother left behind after my dad died. Now they received this diagnosis that, okay, now Jilly's got a brain cancer, so worried about losing me. So of course, all they want me to do is, what the doctors say, and don't try and argue, Jilly. Because I'd read so much up until that point, I was like, I don't want to do any of it, don't want any radiation, don't want any chemo. And I'd watched all the documentaries and I knew what was going to happen. I knew exactly what was coming and I didn't want any of it. I was like, I'll have the surgery, but after that, I want to go to Germany. I want to go to a clinic where they can, give me therapies that will actually help my body heal. I don't believe why toxic treatment is going to help me when I'm healthy. But of course, that brought up so much stress between me and my family. That was more painful than actually having the diagnosis in the first place, having to argue with my family every single day. I tried to even Skype in a doctor from a clinic in Germany to speak to them in Hong Kong so that they'd be speaking to a medical professional, but that didn't even work. So in the end, I could feel the stress bubbling under my skin. I knew that was going to bring the cancer back quicker than anything. And so in the end, I said, I told myself, look, I'll do the treatment, but I can focus all my efforts on doing all the complementary stuff on the side. And so that's what I really, focused on 150%.
Gives you something, I think, to focus on as well. I think, again, a bit like working with autoimmunity, I think if you've got those other things, with any of these chronic illnesses, they kind of take your power away from you. They take your control away. You sort of feel like you've not got any control over anything. And I think if you can put your effort into things like nutrition, lifestyle, supplements, that's the beauty of functional medicine. You are an active participant in that type of care.
Yeah.
And I think being an active participant is actually really important. It gives you something, it gives you that control back, it gives you back power over the diagnosis, over
Absolutely.
the illness. You feel like you're doing something to fight it, as opposed to just completely surrendering to, I've got to have what everybody tells me, because I hadn't, up until very recently, we hadn't experienced sort of cancer within the family, and you don't realize how it builds up, and all of a sudden everything is taken over. Like life, just your whole life is taken over. I do think that these things that you can do for yourself do help give you that little bit of power back.
Absolutely.
You're almost, you're making it smaller, I guess, aren't you? Because you're taking back some of that control. And I think that's important for people that are going through that journey.
Yeah. And some people also might not feel that's necessary. I know lots of people who actually just do the standard of care treatments, and because they 100% believe that is the right thing for them, that's absolutely okay too.
Yeah.
Everyone has such different paths in this, and it's such an individual choice. And I always say, whatever you choose, whether it's just the conventional path, or it's a mix of both, or it's just the natural path, it has to feel right for you. Because in the end, you're the one that's at the end of the day, it's your life, right? You're the one who has to like be responsible for making that decision. And also being comfortable that whatever you choose, there's no guarantee either way, whether you go fully conventional or both or natural. There's no guarantee. It's 50-50, whatever you choose. So you've got to really believe in what you're choosing. And I think that's the hardest thing to people to come to the table with. Like, okay, if I end up dying because of this, and you've got to be comfortable with like, this might not work and I might not make it, but at least I will have done what I thought was right for me. That's really hard for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I think that's really hard. But I do see in my clinic now that there are more and more people that are being offered treatments from the oncologist, and just sitting back and having that time to sit with it and actually coming to the point where that doesn't make a lot of sense for me. Sometimes it's not adding much more life to the prognosis. So why would I want to spend that little time that I have actually suffering and having all those side effects? And that's allowing us to work together. And actually, we're seeing amazing stuff happening because the oncologists, if they're nice oncologists, they are still monitoring the patient whilst we're working on the diet and lifestyle stuff. And we're seeing through the scans that actually tumors are shrinking on their own. And I don't say on their own because it's still a heck of a lot of work doing the functional medicine stuff. Like, as I said, it's a full-time job. It's just amazing that, a few years ago, I would never have seen this, but it just shows that people are starting to open, people's eyes are opening to that there are other ways to do this once you get a diagnosis, which is that's really where it's exciting. But again, I'm not saying don't do any treatment because, again, it's such a personal decision. And so many people, and I'm a living example, I did both. I did the full gamut, surgery, chemo, radiation, and I did all of it alongside with the help of a practitioner. That is what I know, that just fueled me with passion. And that's, retrained, got out of training, opened up my clinic in 2020. Luckily for COVID, it meant that everything went online. So now my clinic is completely online. I'm able to travel with my work. I'm living the life that I dreamed of, really. And that's what cancer gave me. I do try and preach that, cancer can be the biggest gift you've ever received if you allow yourself to see it that way. My whole life changed for the better after my diagnosis, and it gave me the chance to walk away from a lifestyle that ultimately was not giving me any joy, even if at the beginning it did, but at the end it was empty. So I'm eternally grateful for my diagnosis, which sometimes freaks people out.
I think that's lovely. I think it's because everybody, if you ask the vast majority of people, most people are going to say it's like, the worst thing that could happen. Even the people who had it would be, like we said, it's that fear. People would dread it. I think to put that spin on it is actually a really positive thing to do as well. You've got to focus on those little positives, haven't you?
Yeah. And I do meet people, who start with me in clinic, and I say these kind of things and they really resonate from day one. And so it's not just me, like it is becoming, let's say.
Yeah.
So it's really exciting.
I like that. What sort of role does nutrition play? Are there any sort of tips that you can give? Is it very personalized to each person, or are there some things that come through that are good for everybody? Or is there things that people can do from a preventative sort of aspect? What sort of role does nutrition play?
Yeah, I mean, a huge role. I mean, the only caveats, like I mentioned, like particular things, like I said, the green tea and the compound EGCG in green tea. The only other caveat, I think, with supplements would be things like quercetin. So again, if you haven't looked into your DNA, quercetin can also further inhibit certain enzymes which wouldn't be in your favor. And so it's little things like that. So again, working with someone in the field that has this knowledge specific to cancer, but across the board, things that you can't go wrong with. Vegetables.
Yep.
Vegetables. Eat the rainbow. We've heard it all the time. And particularly with cancer, cruciferous vegetables really carry the most anti-cancer fighting properties, I would say. But also those in the allium family, so your garlic, your onions, all of those, try and get them into the diet every single day. What I try and work with my clients is really how can we bring all of these really powerful functional foods into a daily routine that feels manageable? And then you can, or into a, anti-cancer juice, which has zero fruit in it, apart from maybe a little bit of lemon at the end. But otherwise it's all vegetable. Like that's a real green juice. None of this apple stuff that's going in there. Like I'm tricked so many times when I see like, oh, a really lovely like cold pressed juice in a health food shop. And it says, all greens. And, if I don't look at the back label and verify, like, there's no fruit in there, I'm, tricked the minute that I take a sip. I'm like, oh my God. And that's me as a practitioner 9 years later of like being really strong on this. But it means that if that can be a daily intake coming into your life every single day, and even every single sip and bite that you're taking, you're actively fighting cancer, because there are so many anti-cancer foods. There's ginger, your turmeric, celery, parsley, all of these things that we can just, capers, they all contain like phytonutrients that have cancer anti-tumor properties. And a lot of them are delicious as long as you know.
That I love as well.
Yeah. And it's just like, and, summer's coming, and these are really easy to make beautiful salads with, or dips and sauces like chimichurris or salsa verdes, where you just blitz all of these together with some olive oil, spice it up with some chili flakes or chili peppers, and it can be really exciting and beautiful. And yeah, it's just about making this whole healing journey, as cheesy as that sounds, as exciting as possible given the circumstances, but also bringing the family in, because it's such a family affair. So I'll often have the patient, but, partner or wife, parents, if it's a kind of younger patient, sometimes a whole family. And then we'll have a WhatsApp group so that in between, anyone in the family can ask questions in between appointments, because some of those nagging questions, you're in a supermarket and you're not quite sure if this is like in the guidelines or whatever. And so those quick things can be sorted out really quickly. It's that kind of hand holding that I never felt I got, with my nutritionist, as amazing as he is. And I still will message him like, what do you think about this? And, but I didn't have that. And so that's kind of what I've worked into my program when I work with people. I get as much joy from it as I hope I give to my clients. So, again, I feel like I'm being so blessed and I'm living like the best life.
I love that. It's and it's nice that something that is so horrible really has also given you so much.
Yeah. So much.
What about exercise? Because that's something we've not, we sort of talked about the stress in terms of that style sort of side of things. What about lifestyle factors around the exercise and things like that?
Yeah, I'm generally more prone to encourage people to do gentle exercise. The body is coping with so much, like particularly if someone's going through standard of care. And sometimes people get way too ahead of themselves, and like they'll get an all clear, like the first scan that they get an all clear, and then they sign up for a marathon. And I'm just like, please God, no, because the repercussions of that is then what I've got to clean up afterwards. Yeah. And it's never nice. So it's telling people like gentle exercise. Really the morning routine, firstly, it's getting people to meditate, which I came to quite late in my journey. But when I finally did start doing it, I have just noticed like radical improvements in so many areas of my life, not just health, but just spiritually and just emotionally and in relationships, in all parts of my life, and just how to handle, detaching from things so that I don't hold on to things so much. And so I always try and start there now with my clients. So really it's the mental emotional that is key. And actually there's so many authors that have written amazing cancer books. And, the chapter on the mental emotional piece is always at the end. But my favorite, absolute mentor is Dr. Naisha Winters in the US. She was my complete idol. So her book, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, is just one that every person that has a diagnosis should read, or actually anyone without a diagnosis should even read, so that you get to know yourself. Everything that I've been talking about, she lays out in this book, and how to, amazing questionnaire at the beginning of the book to identify like where your weaker spots might be that you might want to look into. And then you can, see if you want to find support for that. But anyway, her mental emotional piece was right at the end of the book. And she said, if that chapter was at the beginning of the book, no one would read it. And it's so true, because no one wants to do that stuff.
Yeah. I get the same with the autoimmune. Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
I'm very strong now. Start of the program, I am talking about it as soon as like I'm with that person and they have committed to the program. You know, they're trapped now. They can't escape me. So like I'm going in there, but I'll give people a really nice intro. So, you know, most people have heard of Deepak Chopra.
Yeah.
So a really nice intro into meditation is his 21 Days of Abundance meditation. So that can be found on YouTube or Spotify. I created just an easy playlist. So day 1 to 21 for my clients that I can just send to them and they can start, you know, I say first of the month, great time to restart. So if you fall off the wagon, you can restart the next first of the month and just listen to one meditation at a time. He gives you kind of a life lesson with each one, which is amazing. And then the actual meditation is just like 5 minutes at the end of it. And he gives you a mantra to kind of say in your head. And it's just an easy way to ease people into it. And most people love it. And I say, just give it a try. And it's all about finding what works for you.
Yeah.
Like with anything, I can give you all the tools that I use, but at the end of the day, you got to do it. And so it's got to be something that feels right for you. But it's a nice starting point.
With the meditation, you know, whatever meditation, breathwork, journaling, you know, whatever it is that you use for that side of thing, for the meditation, for this sort of that stress, I find that with all my you know, autoimmune patients as well, it's got to be, I can give them lots of different examples of things that they can do. I do find exactly the same as you. People are quite often resistant to that kind of mind, you know, that mindfulness work. It's about finding that thing that just can ease them into doing it. And it's finding something they feel comfortable. Some people, you know, I found in clinic, you know, some people will dig straight in and they'll love journaling and they'll love, you know, maybe they love having prompts or maybe they just love free writing. And then some people will hate journaling and just find that's just not the thing for them, you know, and it's actually putting on, you know, a meditation tape, you know, from an app or, you know, something like that actually works for them much better.
Yeah, and they don't get irritated by the voice of the person doing the meditation. Like that's really important as well. Like that grinding
really
voice. Like,
yeah, finding somebody that is just soothing for you, you know, and that again, that would be different for everybody. But yeah, I find that a lot with that sort of that mindfulness work is it's got to be something that just connects with each individual, with each person, and that can be different for different people. But it's so important to find it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I'm very strong on also, again, it's all coming back. The more and more work that I do now, I'm noticing it's the psycho-emotional element that is missing in a lot of people. You know, people can be doing all the right things, taking, you know, eating the right way, doing the right exercises, doing all the stuff. But if they're not sorting out their mental, emotional capacity and their strength, you know, forgiving people that they need to forgive, you know, really looking at every relationship they've got in their life and are they holding on to any kind of tension in any of those areas? That's really a really important one. I listened to an integrative oncologist in America, and the first thing he would ask any cancer patient who came through his door was, who do you need to forgive? And it's just, I think putting that right in front of people is, you know, right from the beginning is so important, because the rest of the stuff, you know, juicing, all the therapies, complementary IV nutrition, taking all the supplements, that's the easy part. You know, people are saying, oh, it's so hard, blah, blah, blah. But actually the hard work is when you got to do the inner work stuff.
Yeah.
And I think and I don't know how many autoimmune conditions are life-threatening, but I think when you get a cancer diagnosis, you are literally thinking, I'm going to die. Well, most people. Mm-hmm. And so being faced with your mortality is also something, if you can try and come to terms with that early on in life and not have that fear, that can be so helpful. And it, you know, being faced with your mortality, I mean, there's nothing like that to help someone really look inside and think, okay, what matters in the end? You know, it's about spending time with family, finding joy between all of these other appointments and all the medical stuff. At the end of the day, what is important in life, really?
Yeah.
And it's I try and help people see that, because otherwise, what's the point? You know, you can do all of this stuff, but if you're not focusing on what's actually really important to you as a person, that's really what I'm finding more recently in my work, actually.
Maybe that's the book that you need to write to add to all the books. If it's at the end of the chapter of everybody else's, maybe you need to write where it's at the beginning. So if somebody is interested in integrating functional medicine into treatment plans in with convention, if they want to get started, it's maybe something that they've not heard about sort of realized is an option for them. If they're listening to this and actually thinking this is now an option for me and they want to get started, what would be your advice for people that want to get going with something like this?
Sure. Well, my advice is read and watch as much as you can and listen to as much as you can on this thread of integrating complementary medicine and standard of care oncology. And I think one of the best resources, as well as podcasts, like this one, listening to people who have lived experience, as well as going on to be practitioners. I myself, when I started my clinic, I wanted everyone in my team and in my clinic to have experienced cancer, retrained, and gone on to want to give back and help people through it. And I'm still holding that to this day. It's taken me a long time to find people for that exact reason, but I'd rather be patient and wait for that. But a best resource, I started volunteering when I moved back to the UK. Obviously, I'd felt kind of alone on my journey up until that point because, yes, I had my nutritionist, but my whole family was kind of against everything that I was doing because it was expensive. I had to actually crowdfund to afford everything that I was doing on the complementary side because I didn't want to have to ask my family for the money. And it's very difficult. And I know a lot of patients who go through this as well. The family doesn't understand why bother with all of this other stuff. Why are you not eating? Why are you taking all these supplements? Like my mom and brother would, every time I would ask for a certain meal at home, every pill I would take, rolling their eyes, like, God, like, what are you doing? Like making it so difficult to like keep this motivation. Like, I know this is right for me. Yes, I've lost loads of weight, but I feel the strongest that I've ever felt like in my life. And I know this is right for me. They thought it was the brain tumor talking, so you really have a lot to face when you're dealing with this and you don't have people on board with what you're doing. But I moved back to the UK and there's a charity called Yes to Life. And they're the only integrative cancer charity in the UK. And Robin Daly lost his daughter to a brain tumor when she was in her early 20s. So very devastating. But he created this amazing charity off the back of that to help people be more informed about all the things that you can do on top of, alongside the standard of care. And on that website, yestolife.org.uk, there's a radio show, and Robin actually interviews so many integrative cancer experts from throughout the world, and even doctors in the UK and all sorts of therapists. And so listening, there's hundreds there, so there's lots to work through, but that's a really amazing resource. And they also do annual conferences. So every year there's an online one and an in-person one. And they're just a place where you can meet other people that are doing out-of-the-box things so you don't feel alone. And in 2017, I went to the first annual conference that I was able to go to. And it was like a breath of fresh air. I literally met my tribe. And I was like, this is where I'm not alone. Like, there are other people doing all of these wacky things. Like, I'm not crazy. And it was just such a homecoming for me. And so and this charity, they have a helpline completely free. I volunteered on it while I was still studying. And it's just a space that you can listen to someone. Often the volunteers on the helpline have been through cancer themselves. And it's just a space where you can be heard. Caregivers can also call the helpline. It's for anyone that's been affected by cancer, not just if you're the patient yourself. And it's a signposting helpline. So if you are looking for this kind of support with nutrition side of things, ring up the helpline. They can signpost you to a nutritionist near you, or, we're all online these days, but there is a Yes to Life directory on the website. So you can even search, what you're looking for, and then it will come up with all the therapists in the UK and abroad. You can search abroad as well. So I'd say start there. And then they also have these amazing wigwam support groups, which was an initiative by the charity. And it's a growing network of support groups for people with cancer. They're also starting caregiver support groups as well. But there is something that people can immediately join, which is called the Wigwam Cafe, and it's every 2 weeks. And it's just a place that you can go to have a chat with a wonderful lady called Sarah. and she will introduce you to what the concept of these wigwam cafes, and you can be allocated to a support group. Some of them are online, some of them are in person. I actually run an in-person support group down in Totnes in Devon, where I moved to after I finished studying and after lockdown. And so that's a monthly support group that I love facilitating. It's something I've always wanted to do. I think having the in-person touch just is so important. It really helped me back when I was going to support groups, except the ones that I was going to were at the hospitals in London. And it was quite depressing because you would go there and, people were talking about how awful, like what they were suffering with. And there they are sipping their Coca-Colas and their Mars bars, and you can't unlearn stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I think with our job, we learn all this incredible knowledge, and then it's like, oh my God. And you can't judge people either. Everyone has their own journeys, but it wasn't a helpful environment for me to be in. And, I said to myself, and also those Macmillan bake sales, like I could, every time I see that they're trying to help someone with cancer and they're putting on like a cake sale with all the refined sugars that go into these cakes. And yes, they mean so well, but they're forgetting the main key thing that, the link between sugar and cancer. The last thing we need to be doing is giving people cakes and encouraging them. Then yes, it can console them maybe and make them feel better in that short split second, but ultimately it's not helping the people and ultimately the people that they're caring about. Anyway, that's a whole nother story, but with the Yes to Life group, but they're so good in so many ways, those other charities, but the Yes to Life I just love because it's just, we're so open about talking about all things, oxygen therapy, breath work, cold exposure, sea swimming, all of those benefits that can help towards our recovery or during treatment. And it doesn't have to go into detail. I'm not a nutritionist. I don't have that hat on when I'm sitting in that support group. I'm purely there to help people connect with each other and meet fellow people. We all have different cancers. In my mind, all cancer originates from dysfunctional cell metabolism. And so it doesn't matter where a cancer manifests in someone, it all, the root cause, it all starts in the same place. So how can we nourish those cells that are changed back to, proper function? With or without treatment. Yeah, so I would start there. Yes to Life. That was a very long-winded.
And what about your website? How can people find you if they want to?
So, you can find me at bertramclinic.com. Yep, find me through there. There's a contact page. I'm reachable through that. Instagram, I'm very not great with my social media. I do have a Bertram Clinic handle, but I don't post very much on there, but I'm very happy for people to even view my personal one. It's completely open. So that's just Gillian Bertram. Yeah.
We'll drop all the links below the episode, and we'll put your in the show notes, and we'll put your website and everything so that people can get in touch with you. Well, I've just also been making a note as we've been chatting through some of the things you mentioned, like the charity and some of the books that you've mentioned. So
yeah, I think I mentioned 2 books, the anti-cancer one and then Dr. Nasha's one, but there's one more that really helped me along the way. And that as soon as I was diagnosed, I read Dying to Be Me by Anita Moorjani. Very, very powerful one.
We'll link all of those recommendations below the episode so that people can quickly get to those resources, and of course link your website as well. And then if people want to reach out and chat to you a bit more, they can do.
Super.
Gilly, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Nicole.
It's been brilliant to do this, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Well, we'll speak soon. But thanks again. It was great.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Good Health Podcast. Do share the episode with anyone who you think it may benefit or who may enjoy it, and help me spread the word by rating the episode or leaving a review. If you want more, you can find other episodes in the series on your podcast app or sign up to my free newsletter. Not only will you get information on new episodes launching, but we cover lots of health topics with the Ask Nicole section where you can send in your questions, my favorite recipes, my favorite products, tips and tricks to help you on the road to good health, and much more. You can sign up free of charge at nicolegoodhealth.com/newsletter, also linked below. I hope you have a lovely week. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.